Welcome to Skeleton Key Tales. Today's story: The Omen, Part 3. Unbar the gates! The heavy east gate slowly parted, letting through a tired traveler leading a famished, stumbling donkey. The man was breathing heavily, and his hair was messy and tangled. He held one hand over a bulging leather satchel. Even before he let the guards know who he was, there was no mistake. The man was a messenger sent to Kamum from some distant city. And with the Omen still fresh in everyone's memory, it was hard to imagine the messenger's arrival was in no way linked to the star. As such, the guards hurried to let the man through, believing he was bearing news somehow connected to the Omen. The guards and watchmen of Kamum, just like the rest of the commoners, were naturally very superstitious. This time, however, superstition matched reality. The Lugu knew that a stranger delivering important news had entered his city before the tired messenger even managed to reach the end of the first street. In a sorry state though he might have been, he was still taken aback by the splendor that suddenly surrounded him. Turning his head left and right, ignorant of the pleating brace of his donkey, he walked the grand streets and crossed squares rivaling the greatest temples of his homeland. When he finally reached the Lugu's palace, a bath was already waiting for him, with fresh bread, meat and a jug of beer served, and the tall elegant doors of the hall of visitors were slightly ajar, inviting him in after a brief rest. Without a word, with only a bow, the servants took his donkey away to the stables. When the messenger entered the hall of visitors, the Lugu, resting upon a simple throne of carved and decorated cedar, made a gesture toward his vizier. The opulent man promptly trotted to the guest. "Please, stay where you are," he said to the messenger in a sugary tone. "Yes, right here. The Lugu needs not to feel your presence closer." Afraid to move a step nearer, the messenger shifted from one foot to the other. A tiny fold appeared on the rich carpet below his wrapped feet. The vizier wrinkled his nose at the sight. The hall of visitors was almost completely still and quiet, as if secluded from the rest of the world, if not for the chirp of some exotic bird in an electrum cage, flaunting its emerald green feathers, and the babble of a little pet monkey in a corner. There was a pleasant twilight in the hall, a shelter from the sun born of thin, exquisite canopies, and veils swaying with the wind. "My lord!" The messenger knelt, only to hear a warning hiss from the vizier. "No, no, no, don't offend the Lugu's ears." The vizier gently waved his hand at the guest. "State your business to me. You have a message, we presume." For a moment the messenger appeared confused, but he quickly regained his composure, rose, and slid his hand into his leather satchel. "I bring news from Ganma, dispatched urgently by my Lugu." He passed a clay tablet to the vizier. The man pulled out a tiny piece of laced linen and rubbed the tablet clean. Then, with an expression as if he were doing the messenger from Ganma a favor, he ran his glance through the tight rows of cuneiform. With each word read, his face grew paler and paler. He quickly turned and ran to the Lugu, who had by now noticed the alarm in his servant. The air of quiet superiority around him blew over. With a frown he extended his arm impatiently. The Lugu grabbed and read the tablet. His expression grew stern. He addressed the messenger directly. "How long ago have you seen them?" "Our watchmen saw them pass 4 days ago. They were moving slowly but in great numbers. It was a sea of warriors and a forest of spears." For a moment the Lugu sat there leaning forward as though contemplating whether he should fall off his throne. His brows were knitted, and his unblinking stare cast at the expensive carpets on the floor. Finally he drew a great breath and straightened up. "Thank you for bringing the news. Go back to Ganma and tell your Lugu that Kamum is grateful. We are in your debt. And before you depart the city," the Lugu snapped his fingers at the vizier, "you, make sure our guest is properly rewarded. Fetch the treasurer. Give the man another donkey, and load as much silver on it as it can carry." "Thank you, my lord." The messenger offered a deep bow and backed away out of the hall. The vizier, still pale-faced, turned to his ruler and spread his arms. "It's a war, my lord!" he exclaimed. "What will be your orders?" The Lugu pondered for a while. He raised his finger. "Send for the High Diviner. Before I meet my commanders, I wish to talk about omens." The High Diviner entered the Hall of Visitors later that day. When his robed figure stepped into the shade of the room, the Lugu clapped his hands loudly once at the servants and officials populating the space. Promptly everyone hurried out. With the clang of the closing gate, the two men were left alone. "I heard the news," the High Diviner began. "They are spreading fast. There's no hiding news of such weight from the masses," the Lugu said with a shrug as he passed the tablet brought from Ganma to the priest. The High Diviner accepted it and began to read. Meanwhile, the Lugu continued. "I suppose we should thank the gods that we are in alliance with Ganma. No one else brought us a word of warning, and it's ironic that it's the most distant riverside settlement that hurries to our aid. The human are on the march, and they have gathered numbers so vast Ganma was left petrified. According to what the people of Ganma know, the human have launched a great assault from their stronghold of Maharan in the uplands, and have already overcome several smaller villages. They are coming to raid and pillage, as per usual." The High Diviner raised his eyes to the Lugu. "And they are bound for Kamum?" "There's no prize worthier of their greed than Kamum. Even if they were marching in the opposite direction, I would assume they were about to circle to us." "Then there's no doubt," the High Diviner said, returning the tablet. "This is what the Omen was warning us against. This is what Sher-Tesh wanted us to know, and he sent a star along his maze to bring us not weapons, but protection. If a god believes we should defend rather than meet the human horde at the gates of their stronghold, we must obey." "Indeed, we will. I called you first to inquire about the set of Hasartum armor. Is it ready?" "It is, but the blessing rituals are not yet complete. Before the code can be lowered upon your shoulders, it must receive Gigurum's appraisal, even though Gigurum doesn't speak to us." "How long will it take?" "At dusk you will have your armor. Tomorrow your commanders will also don it." "Excellent. This is not just a war with human." The Lugu stood up and, his hands locked behind his back, approached the birdcage. The creature inside turned its long neck gracefully. The ruler nodded to his own thought and shared it with the High Diviner. "This is the manifestation of Kamum's divine destiny. Mine as well, and yours, and that of every commander and spearman who will stand against the assault. The gods favor us, and we enjoy the privilege of being chosen by them, of being born in the most magnificent city in all the world. These vile heathens know not what awaits them. Their souls will be sacrificed to Sher-Tesh, their weapons and armor to Gigurum, and their mortal husks will be left to dry in the desert to Urgul's delight. You have discovered the meaning of the Omen. You own the right to see the gods' will done no less than I. I want you to be present when the battle starts." The High Diviner, however, had been plagued by doubts ever since he saw the flame arch in the night sky. As he listened to the inspired words of the Lugu, he heard a blind man speak of the stars. The Lugu felt the presence of the divine but was unable to tell whether it brought kindness or misfortune. After so many days and such a great omen, Gigurum was still silent. The Lugu knew not what he was heading toward, and neither did the High Diviner. Even Sher-Tesh didn't respond to his rituals, regal and abundant though they may have been. It seemed that the Father of Stars had become a mute observer. But why? The High Diviner couldn't find an answer to this question, nor could he dare pose it to the Lugu. Sher-Tesh had chosen them, that was beyond doubt. But what did he choose us for? The High Diviner thought to himself. For now, however, before he could figure out the meaning of all that had transpired, he had to put his ruler at ease. lest poisonous doubt raise his confidence and cost them all a great city. "I will be there," the High Diviner said, lowering his head. In great haste, he departed back to the temple. The High Diviner stood tall atop a small hill not too far outside the walls of Kamum, clutching a large satchel. Covering his eyes from the sun with his other hand, he peered into the distance, where a cloud of rolling dust and the drumming of hundreds of feet heralded the coming of the hillman. Exorcists, temple custodians, stargazers, assistants, and apprentices of all kinds surrounded the High Diviner like Jupiter is beset by its satellites. He then turned to watch the great army of Kamum pass through the gates, their spears readied and their eyes set eastward where the enemy marched. No matter the splendor or rigorous training, Kamum's phalanxes seemed but a rock next to a cliff compared to the coming tide. The Lugu, his commanders, and the best of his warriors paraded at the front of the force. Their new armor, shining radiant blue in the sun, made them look like lapis beads strewn among dusty pebbles. The High Diviner watched this blue gleam rival the sky itself. If pride, he thought, could be wrought with a hammer, it would be blue. The Lugu issued a command that sank into the myriad of thundering steps, and his chariot separated itself from the army, circling to the hill occupied by the High Diviner and the rest of the clergy. Like a blue bolt, it cut through to the hilltop position. As the Lugu approached, the High Diviner couldn't help but admire the magnificent work of Kamum's craftsmen. He nonetheless felt restless. The gods were silent. The glare of Hasartum promised more mystery than it did answers. The scaled codes were the wrappings of Omen, an extension of Shereteshe's will which no mortal could comprehend. The Lugu disembarked and met with the High Diviner at the top. He moved his shoulders, and a scaled coat of blue responded with a cryptic chime. "Gods are with us and watching. There is nothing that can penetrate this divine carapace. But something has been troubling me, old friend. It feels..." The Lugu took a passing glance over his armor. "Alive. I swear to Gigarum I sense it moving, crawling. The more I wear it, the less I wish to do so, but the hillman would only be glad to see you unprotected." The High Diviner finished the thought. He scrutinized the armor he himself had blessed just a couple of days ago in the temple, right in the grand chamber. There was truth to the Lugu's words. Something seemed off about the metal shell. "Say," the High Diviner narrowed his eyes, "wasn't it shorter? When you tried it on the first time, it reached just below your waist. Now the coat is almost at your knees." The Lugu blinked in silence. For a moment he hesitated. With a violent shake of his head, he cast the doubt away. His Hasartum helmet fit his head as tightly as a second skull would. "I rely on you," the Lugu finally replied, his finger pointing at the hefty satchel. "The gods may be watching over us, but I still feel best knowing you will hold proper ceremony to ensure our safety." With that, he climbed back onto his chariot and departed in a cloud of dust. The High Diviner nodded, more to himself than to the shrinking figure of the Lugu. He opened the satchel and called upon his assistants to prepare the site for a ritual, as the crescendo of stomping feet grew ever louder. The contents of the satchel were carefully unpacked. Within enchanted cuts of linen, blessed by the sun, the moon, and the stars, and soaked in flowery distillations, were various clay tablets and items of ritual importance. There were metal and lapis beads and gemstone leaves, along with divination symbols cut into cedar wood. The High Diviner, whispering spells and chants, placed these magical items in a proper pattern, while the assistants installed clay tablets with prophecies and conjurations all around the hilltop like tiny tilting obelisks. Only one piece of the puzzle remained. The High Diviner reached for his satchel and produced yet another piece of sacred cloth, wrapped around a spherical item. This item had been taken out of the studded ziggurat only twice, both times for incredible occasions. This day promised a third such occasion. The High Diviner looked briefly in the direction of the salt flats, only to see a wall of hasting warriors. From the hill they seemed as tiny as a disorderly heap of toys, and yet they instilled fear in anyone who looked their way. The vicious hillmen had the greatest prize they could win in their sight, the city of Kamum, resting proud in its luster behind walls and gates. Inside the wrapping was a monstrous agate the size of a grown man's two fists put together, polished into a smooth sphere that trapped light within its precious depths. This artifact had been kept in the studded ziggurat under the eternal vigil of generations of temple custodians. It was believed to be a childhood toy of Gigerum, from when the world was still young, and there were no humans treading it. Through this agate, the link to Gigerum was the strongest. If the god were to ignore the High Diviner's call, it would mean only one thing. The god was dead, and no effort, no matter how heroic, would save Kamum from ruin. The High Diviner, with as much reverence as he could express, arching his back and bowing so low his lips touched the earth, eased the agate into the center of the ritual site, pressing down on the sphere cautiously to settle it into the dust. The High Diviner straightened his back and drew a deep breath. He cast a quick glance at the two armies that were now about to converge upon one another. The bright blue of Hasartum was at the tip of Kamum's attack. "Leave me," he hurled back at all the rest of the people haunting the hill. They withdrew without hesitation. At the foot of the hill they prepared to watch the great battle that was only moments from beginning. Some sat down, eager as if about to see a stage performance. Others could barely keep themselves from shuddering. The High Diviner began his sacred work. Whispering conjurations, he moved around the site from one tablet to another, declaiming the cuneiform writings. He called out to Gigerum. He pleaded with the great patron of Kamum to answer his loyal subjects in this time of trial. After he made a full circle around the ritual site, the High Diviner lowered himself onto the ground. He was still chanting as he groped about and grabbed two lamps filled with sweet divination oil. With flint and pyrite he lit their wicks and inhaled the heavy, fragrant smoke. He noticed how the gemstone leaves began to tremble, as though from a gust of gemstone wind. Gigerum had heeded his words after all. The patron of Kamum felt near, and yet the High Diviner knitted his brows. Gigerum didn't say a word. Trained through decades of conversing with the divine, the man continued his conjurations undisturbed, tapping this or that ritualistic object with his two outstretched fingers. It was the end of the chant, and still there was no answer, only a suggestion of motion, the feeling of struggle, as if Gigerum tried to speak without a mouth. Something indeed wasn't right. With the last word spoken, the High Diviner froze with his head down and both his hands raised, a lamp in each. Nothing. Only the clamor of the distant battle coming and going like the tide of sound. But then, rapidly, a deadly premonition swelled inside the High Diviner. He lifted his eyes and gasped. Both lamps slipped from his hands and dropped onto the ground, spilling their precious oil. The High Diviner clutched his robes. He glanced at the agate in the center of the ritual site, to witness how, with a loud crack like that of a whip, an ugly split snaked along the gem's surface. No! The High Diviner managed to exhale before excruciating pain paralyzed him. Gigerum was screaming. His voiceless, world-splitting cry crashed upon the High Diviner with the weight of a planet, splattering him against the ground, forcing him to bite the earth from untold strain. Emotions and thoughts that a human mind couldn't process washed over the High Diviner, released through his ritual all at once. But the High Diviner didn't need to know the language of Gigarum to feel that the studded giant was screaming the name of Sheertesh in a fit of unimaginable rage. Only then was the High Diviner finally able to wheeze in a breath of air. He convulsed on the ground, his body disobeying his every command. Finally, he managed first to roll to all fours, then to rise, painfully slowly. He discovered the answers he had sought. His face contorted into a mask of anguish as he looked far into the distance at the battling armies. There was little left to still call a battle. The blue facets of Hasartum's scales gleamed in the sun. There were neither coats nor helmets, nor were there any warriors boasting them, for the scales had indeed grown, just as the High Diviner had feared, and covered their wearers from head to toe. Pitted against one another were the Hillmen, the army of Khamum, and a handful of creatures of the stars, entrapping inside what was once the ruler of the land and his best warriors. Those metal-scaled fiends fought viciously, cutting down one line of foes after another. It was not a war, but a slaughter. And when their weapons snapped and shattered, they fought with their bare hands, cracking skulls like ripe fruit, and breaking limbs as if they were ears of wheat. Spears and stones bounced off their skin as if they were mere twigs and breadcrumbs. There was no overcoming these monsters with simple weapons or the strength of hand. The Hillman horde, or whatever was left of it, turned and broke into a frantic retreat. And when there were no more Hillmen left to best, the creatures of Omen Silver turned against the defenders of Khamum. Without any more tarrying, the High Diviner picked up his robes and barreled down the slope of the hill, leaving behind the sacred wealth of the studded ziggurat. Like many others who witnessed the battle, he was running toward the gates, in a desperate attempt to hide from death behind the walls. The High Diviner couldn't accept the haunting revelation. The silent scream of Gigarum was still ringing through his body. For his entire long life, he had believed gods were above mortals in all but the likeness of limbs and face, oblivious to human feelings and squabbles, impregnable to vice. At least the sort of vice that drives a man to steal. But Sheertesh stole from Gigarum. It was a cruel and cunning plan, devised by Sheertesh to wrest the greatest city on earth from Gigarum. Sheertesh's compassion, care and protection turned out to be nothing more than tools of jealousy. The seed of corruption was sent inside an errant star to be discovered, while the studded giant was silenced and imprisoned, weakened as all the praise of Khamum turned away from him and to Sheertesh instead, even if only for several days. And in the feebleness of their tiny minds, the High Diviner, the Lugal, and every last shepherd and brickmaker willingly offered their lives to the Father of Stars to be crushed and minced for the final prize, the splendor of Khamum, a fruit proved too tempting for mortals and gods alike. Along the maze of Sheertesh the offering of victory had travelled. It was a deal Khamum had accepted without knowing the price, blinded by the grandeur of the Omen. The High Diviner looked over his shoulder. The warriors of Khamum were running too, with a shadow of horror in their eyes, fleeing from the blue death. It was a rout. With only a moment's hesitation, the High Diviner turned against the current. He was the lone figure running to the desert instead of seeking refuge in Khamum's opulence. He realized, unlike the rest, that Khamum was doomed and counted its last days. For centuries now, Khamum lies in ruins. It is a dead place, a silent monument to the unfathomable wealth it once possessed. It used to deal in silver, now it deals in death and curses. The weight of the curse upon this place is so great it tips the scales against the riches it still holds. The stories of luckless treasure hunters who perished among Khamum's tilting walls grow year by year. The tablets telling them stack so tall no one dares to go there. The High Diviner's fate is a mystery. Perhaps Urgul the Hidden, the master of the desert, spared him his life. They say that in the dead of night, if you listen closely, the High Diviner's maddening cries are blowing in the desert wind. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. Consider subscribing to my channel. You can also find the full text on my Substack. The link is in the description. Until next time.